On November 6, world and religious leaders will gather in Egypt for the COP27 Climate Summit. Climate commandments and sun worship will play an important role. Prophecy from the Bible is being fulfilled. What can we expect? Let's get started. From the UN Environment Programme website, we are told that COP27 is a golden opportunity for all stakeholders to rise to the occasion and tackle effectively the global challenge of climate change facilitated by Egypt on the African continent. The Elijah Interfaith Institute shows that it agrees with the call and is also convening a gathering of religious leaders to talk about it. According to Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development, the Elijah Interfaith Institute and its Board of World Religious Leaders brings together some of the world's most prominent religious figures from Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Buddhism and the religions of India. Now let's take a look at what they are saying here. Returning to Mount Sinai, a prophetic call for climate justice and ceremony of repentance. November 13, 2022, Mount Sinai in parallel with the COP27 UN Climate Conference. When you hear the word Sinai, what comes to mind? Does the word Sinai, in this context, draw your attention to anything? Do you want to know what Sinai has to do with COP27 or climate change conferences? Well, you'll find out in a second. Let's keep reading the article. We return to Mount Sinai in a movement of repentance and quest. We seek a new vision for humanity and its endangered existence, and we seek to receive and amplify a message of life-sustaining living and habits that humanity needs to hear today. In this spirit, the project partners will bring together premier religious leaders from the world's major religions to gather upon Mount Sinai to engage in a first-ever climate repentance ceremony, and to put forth a prophetic interreligious call to action, climate justice, 10 universal commandments. The call's originality in compiling the finest teachings of all religions in support of climate justice draws inspiration from the great prophetic figures associated with Mount Sinai. Now let's talk about Mount Sinai. I'm assuming you already know about Moses on Mount Sinai, but let's go through it anyway. Moses and the Israelites traveled through the wilderness. They came to a mountain called Mount Sinai. Moses and his minister Joshua were now summoned to meet with God. And as they were to be some time absent, the leader appointed Aaron and Hur, assisted by the elders, to act in his stead. And Moses went up into the mount, and a cloud covered the mount. And the glory of the Lord abode upon Mount Sinai. For 6 days the cloud covered the mountain as a token of God's special presence, yet there was no revelation of himself or communication of his will. During this time, Moses remained in waiting for a summons to the presence chamber of the Most High. He had been directed, "Come up to me into the mount, and be there," and though his patience and obedience were tested, he did not grow weary of watching, or forsake his post. This period of waiting was to him a time of preparation, of close self-examination. Even this favored servant of God could not at once approach his presence and endure the exhibitions of his glory. 6 days must be employed in devoting himself to God by searching of heart, meditation, and prayer before he could be prepared for direct communication with his Maker. Upon the 7th day, which was the Sabbath, Moses was called up into the cloud. The thick cloud opened in the sight of all Israel, and the glory of the Lord broke forth like devouring fire. And Moses went into the midst of the cloud, and gat him up into the mount, and Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. The 40 days tarry in the mount did not include the 6 days of preparation. During the 6 days Joshua was with Moses, and together they ate of the manna and drank of the brook that descended out of the mount. But Joshua did not enter with Moses into the cloud. He remained without, and continued to eat and drink daily while awaiting the return of Moses, but Moses fasted during the entire 40 days. Patriarchs and Prophets page 313. At this point, Moses received the 10 Commandments from the Lord. While Moses was on Mount Sinai, the people of Israel got tired of waiting for him. They told Aaron to make statues for them to worship like they had in Egypt. Aaron gathered all their gold and made a statue of a calf. The Israelites worshipped the golden calf and offered sacrifices. They said the golden calf, not the Lord, freed them from Egypt. If your answer to the Sinai question was, the Ten Commandments, or something related to the story we just read, you were correct. Apart from the other lessons that might be learned from the events at Mount Sinai, we want to focus on at least 2 points in this presentation. The first is the 10 Commandments that God handed to Moses, and the second is the golden calf worship. There are additional questions now that they are bringing up Sinai and the 10 Commandments in relation to COP27. Which 10 Commandments are being discussed here? Is it the 10 Commandments of God that we already know from the Bible? Could it be that God is going to give the world another 10 commands? And who would be the new Moses of our generation if God were to do so? As you have probably answered it correctly, God will not give any new 10 Commandments, because he has made his stand very clear in Malachi 3 verse 6 that he changes not. Jesus too affirmed it when he stated in Luke 16 verse 17 that it is easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for one title of the law to fail. If this is so, then what 10 Commandments are they referring to? Please remember that at Mount Sinai, you could either side with God by obeying his 10 Commandments or with Satan by worshipping the golden calf. Since the 10 universal commandments cannot be from God, the devil must be behind it, just as he put pressure on Aaron to make the golden calf through the Israelites. We must be cautious about who we obey, because there are only 2 classes and 2 masters, one cannot worship both. Matthew 6 verse 24, no one can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be devoted to one and despise the other. So when they say 10 Commandments, they are referring to the Pope's 10 Commandments on climate change. CNN continued to say, Pope Francis released a sweeping statement about the environment on Thursday, calling for cultural revolution to change our lifestyles, from our addiction to technology to our treatment of the poor. The document is very long, 184 pages in English. But here are 10 quick commandments the Pope says everybody can follow to stop the disturbing warming of our planet. And they listed them below, which we will look at in a moment, particularly the one relevant to this topic. Now, the group of the world's most prominent religious figures from Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Buddhism and the religions of India that the Elijah Interfaith Institute and its Board of World Religious Leaders brought together will meet at Mount Sinai, and here is a view to be considered. Newsweek, for our sin of emissions, 10+1 Climate Commandments. A group of us, under the auspices of the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development and the Elijah Interfaith Institute, recently came together at Mount Sinai to envision what message of hope and transformation religions can offer to humanity as we grapple with the challenges of climate justice. One of the ideas was returning to the 10 Commandments, given at Sinai. They listed the 10 climate commandments and the 6th one says, keep the Sabbath, and notice what they said about the Sabbath. Emissions are down 30% over the Sabbath every week in Israel and are almost zeroed out on Yom Kippur, that is the Jewish Day of Atonement, the holiest of the year. A global weekly non-carbon day of rest could reduce emissions of the world by 1/7, and can be observed by different faith communities on different days. Be careful not to be misled into thinking they are referring to the Lord's 7th-day Sabbath, which is Saturday. They are not. Daniel 7 verse 25, He shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law. In response to this ecological emergency, the whole purpose of the Pope's Laudato Si encyclical is to grant the world a day of rest, often known as a Green Sunday, which has its roots in paganism. The Pope's position on the environment has evolved to the point where it is now seen as a matter of repentance and 10 Commandment adherence. They are referring to the Pope's Day of Rest in his 10 Commandments, which is translated by Catholic News Service as, Sunday is for family. Revelation 13 verse 3 says, and all the world wondered after the beast. His idea of making Sunday a day of rest to allow the environment to recover is now being accepted all over the world. The United States President shows his support by signing into law the historic Climate Act, which has Catholic fingerprints all over it. Religious leaders are pushing for it and encouraging their followers to take part. We don't know when the Sunday law will go into effect, but it's getting close. How close are we? Only God knows. Keeping your gaze fixed on Jesus will help you avoid it. One of the reasons why keeping the Lord's seventh-day Sabbath, which is Saturday, holy is because it's a way of demonstrating that God is your Creator. Listen to this. The Sabbath is not introduced as a new institution but as having been founded at creation. It is to be remembered and observed as the memorial of the Creator's work. Pointing to God as the maker of the heavens and the earth, it distinguishes the true God from all false gods. All who keep the seventh day signify by this act that they are worshippers of Jehovah. Thus the Sabbath is the sign of man's allegiance to God as long as there are any upon the earth to serve him. The fourth commandment is the only one of all the 10 in which are found both the name and the title of the lawgiver. It is the only one that shows by whose authority the law is given. Thus it contains the seal of God, affixed to his law as evidence of its authenticity and binding force. Now let's talk about COP27, starting with the logo. The distinctive cultural identity of Egypt and Asian Egyptian worship are highlighted in the official logo of COP27. The sun is the logo's primary component. One of the most notable things about Africa. Some individuals hold the view that the sun's rising and setting are symbolic of the cycle of life from conception through death and rebirth. The Aten sun is the second component of the logo. It is centrally symbolized by the sun's rays, which have human hands at their ends. The next element in the logo is the horizon, which represents the ray of the sun and what we must receive from the sun in order to benefit the earth and people. The globe is the other component of the logo, which represents their goal of promoting sun worship throughout the world. The combination of the aforementioned elements leads to the emergence or the rise of paganism in these last days. Through COP27, world and religious leaders are promoting the image of the beast, which is the union of church and state. They are promoting pagan worship, which God's second commandment forbids. The COP27 adds fuel to the Sunday worship by law, which is the mark of the beast. The prophecy is coming true, and the Sunday law is getting closer every microsecond. The International Energy Authority made a statement stating that in order to mitigate the effects of climate change on the environment, the world must limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. No new investment in coal, oil, or gas is required if this goal is to be met. However, according to every report we see, these companies continue to burn coal, despite the fact that we should be moving away from that. We will continue to require gas and oil in order to keep life running. Do you agree with what the International Energy Authority says? Do you believe that making Sunday a day of rest by law is a better solution to the world's climate change problem? What are your thoughts? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. Satan puts his interpretation upon events, and they think, as he would have them, that the calamities which fill the land are a result of Sunday breaking. Thinking to appease the wrath of God, these influential men make laws enforcing Sunday observance. 10 Manuscript Release page 239, 1899. Sunday law advocates do not realize what they are doing. The Sunday movement is now making its way in darkness. The leaders are concealing the true issue, and many who unite in the movement do not themselves see whither the undercurrent is tending. They are working in blindness. They do not see that if a Protestant government sacrifices the principles that have made them a free, independent nation, and through legislation brings into the Constitution principles that will propagate papal falsehood and papal delusion, they are plunging into the Roman horrors of the Dark Ages. Review in Herald Extra, December 11, 1888. Sooner or later, Sunday laws will be passed. Watch this video next and see the nation that will pass the Sunday law.